Great, please do be seated. Just to say again, thanks ever so much for coming. It's good to have you with us. I feel I must explain myself a little bit first. When I was young, I used to love drawing massive pictures. With my friends, we used to get out huge sheets of paper and we'd draw things on them. Now, it has to be said that most of the time it was monsters and men fighting monsters. We had the Marines and we had the Roman soldiers just fighting it out. My mind was a little bit narrower in those days than it is now. Now, what we're going to do this evening is take a much larger piece of paper. It's kind of a drawing surface that I've had great fun kind of planning and constructing with some friends of mine. We need it to be quite big because we are going to draw everything on it. And then we're going to see how Christmas helps us draw it all together. So, let's start with the visible. We can see things because of a wonderful thing called light. Light travels at 186,000 miles per second. That's kind of around the world in 1 second about 8 times. So it's really, really fast. And luckily for us, we have a source of light quite nearby, quite a big source called the sun. It's a star. Let me just draw you a star because they're quite Christmassy. There we go. It's quite a Christmassy star. I should say at this point that I can't spell, so I'm just going to be trying to avoid writing any words if I possibly can. What I'm used to doing is giving presentations and everyone's sort of laughing in front of me at what's behind me. So I've gone for drawing instead today, so you'll probably wonder how awful my spelling is given that my drawing's not that good, but bear with me. This is our sun. This kind of is beaming out light. The sun is really helpful. It kind of stops you bumping into things during the day, and it also helps you grow stuff. I don't know if you're a gardener. I used to be, and not much grew actually. I was doing it in the shade, which wasn't a good idea. I hadn't kind of figured this kind of stuff out. You can grow these things with one of these. You need one of these to grow one of these. It's a Brussels sprout, and I brought it with me because we're going to need it later on. So I'll pop it there. Now, the exciting thing about this is that it's not the only one. We don't just live in Norwich or in Norfolk or even in the UK or the world. Maybe you're from somewhere around the world. We actually live in a place called the Milky Way Galaxy, which is kind of like that. Looks a little bit like that. You want to know where we live? We live kind of pretty much about there in the Milky Way Galaxy. This Milky Way Galaxy is filled with these things, with stars. Now, do you want to know how many stars there are in the Milky Way Galaxy? 100 billion stars. Now, unless you're used to fixing the economy and dealing with huge figures or Bill Gates, you will have no idea how much 100 billion is. Cue the sprouts. Now, you will understand these things, I'm sure. You have a lot of experience of them this time of year. I limit myself to one of these every year about this time. I feel that's entering into the spirit of things without causing myself too much distress. Now, you might be somewhat different to me. You might quite like Brussels sprouts. You might be looking forward to a generous portion of these things. I want you to imagine, if you will, those on your plate right now. About 10 of them. You can do that, can't you? You can grasp that. Looking forward to them? Now, I know that some of you secretly have dreams. And your dream this time of year is to be served up a whole plate of Brussels sprouts. Yeah? I know who you are. Now, you have now in your head, I've done it. I've filled up my plate. And there's about 100 of these will fit on your plate. So you've got that in your head, 100. So we've gone from 1 to 10 to 100. We've got a way to go. Come with me, if you will, to a place where this entire building is filled with Brussels sprouts. If you can do that, you will have imagined 1 billion of something, 1 billion Brussels sprouts. And now if you can imagine 100 king centres, 100 times this whole place filled with Brussels sprouts, you have got somewhere near the number of stars in our Milky Way galaxy. And by some strange twist of fate, each of those stars is, on average, about 100 billion times the size of a Brussels sprout. I don't know how it works out that way, but it does. Now, perhaps you have got a shrinking feeling at the moment in your stomach. perhaps you're kind of looking forward to those Brussels sprouts. But let me help you kind of put us into perspective when I say there are actually 100 billion of these guys in our galaxy, in our universe. 100 billion galaxies, with each galaxy 100 billion stars. This universe is an enormous place. And the ironic thing is that we sing Silent Night. It's a great carol, and I hope we'll sing it later. But as I look up at the stars, I think the universe and the night sky is anything but silent. Have you done that? Have you looked up? And perhaps not in a city. Perhaps you need to drive out. I know it's kind of a busy time of year right now. Maybe, like me, you've been busy building huge back projection systems. Or maybe, like my wife, you've been writing Christmas cards and taking the kids to various things and wrapping presents and so on. It's a busy time of year. But it's also a time of year just to stop and press the pause button and look up at the sky and see whether some questions don't occur to you. Why is there something rather than nothing? And why is there something so awesome and beautiful? Let's go back down to earth. You remember wise men? We're back to the Christmas story. Let me get us back on track. There were these wise men, and they saw one of these stars. They looked up to the night sky, they saw one, and they followed it. And it took them all the way to a little baby in a stable. Now, this baby was pretty much the same in terms of its genetic makeup and its physical appearance as you and me. I've got loads of space here, so I can do you kind of spreading your wings there. There you go. The amazing truth, though, is that that little baby and you are as complex and beautiful as the heavens themselves. We've done the kind of macro thing. We're going micro. You are made out of, I'll put it over here, cells. You know that, don't you, from biology? Do you know how many cells there are in you? There are 100 trillion cells in you. We've done 1 billion. Now we're going on to 1 trillion. In fact, there are 1,000 times more cells in you than there are stars in our Milky Way galaxy. If you can imagine hundreds and thousands of king centers full of Brussels sprouts again, you've got some way to imagining the complexity and the beauty of the human body. Now, in each of these cells, again, I'm sure you know, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA, it's one long molecule that describes you in every single cell. There is it's like walking into Waterstones and going to the non-fiction section and looking at all the books. That is the amount of information in every single one of your cells describing you. And as we zoom into these cells, it's not actually like a bookshop or a library, static and quiet. It's full of extraordinary activity as we see microbiological robots kind of carrying the building blocks of life around molecular scaffolding. All this going on in you, 100 trillion different cells carrying out all the instructions to build you and to replicate you. This is extraordinary. This caused an atheist, Antony Flew, famous guy, quite an articulate guy. As he looked into this, he had discounted the existence of God. As he became aware of the complexity of the cell, which no one talks about simple cells anymore, he came to the conclusion that this was definitely no accident. Didn't become a Christian, but he said, do you know what, I think the evidence points me towards the fact that there is a creative designer behind all this. There has to be. So the point is, you're amazing. Look up at the sky. It's amazing. And the extraordinary thing is that all of this is set up on a knife edge to make all of this possible. See, the universe is full of fixed constants. The speed of light is constant. It's the same all over the place. It holds the universe together and makes it the kind of universe that it is, and makes it able to produce people like you and me walking around. As Fred Hoyle, the astrophysicist, looked into how the production of various atoms in stars, he came up against this fact that this was so precisely balanced to allow for this, that he declared himself to be greatly shaken and said this. He said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the fact seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. The fact is, to me at least, that every star in the sky and every cell in your body and every process that took them there in the first place and that causes them to move and be you and be the stars points to a creator. And the extraordinary facts that we celebrate at Christmas is that this creator stepped into his universe. Just like you and me, made of cells like you and me, and just like you and me, sadly, one day, destined to die. I wasn't supposed to get a laugh. Another guy, Max Lucado, put it better than me. He said this: the omnipotent in one moment made himself breakable. He who had been spirit became pierceable. He who was larger than the universe became an embryo, and he who sustains the world with a word chose to be dependent on the nourishment of a young girl. God as a fetus, the creator of life being created. God was given eyebrows, elbows, 2 kidneys and a spleen. He stretched against the walls and floated in the amniotic fluid of his mother. We're going to stand now. We're going to sing another carol, Angels from the Realms of Glory, and then we're going to come back in a couple of carols' time, I think, and see if there's anything else that we can put on this board to complete our picture of everything. So let's stand and sing.